that work? Yes. Hey everybody, welcome. We are Crypto NYC. This is Blake reporting from Costa Rica. First surf session this morning. I'm down here with David and Nikolai. Today we are doing FRAX, and I will call out people on my screen in order, and a really quick intro, who you are, and if you have any questions or things about FRAX that you would like to talk about. Lane, you want to go first?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Lane, I feel like everyone knows who I am by now. I do like protocol R&D at Space Mesh. I have been interested in stablecoins for a very long time, since the early maker days in 2017. Stablecoins always struck me as like a really low-hanging fruit, like obvious use case for smart contracts and Ethereum and blockchains and things like that. And it's the first, so FRAX is the first like really exciting, innovative project I've seen in the space in a while. So I was excited. I learned about it independently, and then when I saw that you picked it for this week, I was pretty excited to dig in.
Sweet. John?
John, head of growth, Aztec. Interested in just like, is FXS worth owning?
Yeah.
Cool. Parker? Cool. Michael?
Hey everyone, I'm Mike. I'm an investor at a global macro liquid venture fund. Broadly interested in how algo stablecoins can fail and which ones are good.
Cool. Seth, are you just listening or are you participating?
Hey guys, Seth, software engineer in the crypto space for a couple of years now. I have the same thoughts as Michael. We haven't really seen a successful algorithmic stablecoin, so curious to see how this discussion goes.
Cool. David?
Dave, I think you're mute.
I'm Dave. I do some on-chain analysis stuff, mainly focused on Solana right now. And I'm interested to like probe the breaking points and things. That's always fun. So I like to focus on that.
Cool. Howie?
Hey guys, I'm Howie. I'm a software engineer working in DeFi in Possible Finance. Generally I'm pretty skeptical about under-collateralized stablecoins, but given that FRAX has been, working for a while, as well as I think my company actually works with FRAX in some way. So it'll be good to learn more about FRAX and why it's still working.
Cool. Tex?
Hey guys, head of Olympus Pro over at Olympus DAO. Really skeptical of FRAX in the early days, but I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding, and I think it was the most wrong about FRAX in the last year, and they're legit. I think that DAOs basically accumulating FXS along with CVX were like two of the easiest investments to call in the last couple months. And so, yeah, really fascinated by like how they're using the VE tokenomics to kind of like backstop the protocol.
Cool. Nikolai?
I'm a designer and developer, spending time just exploring Web3 more seriously. Worked in the low-code, no-code space for the last little while. And I'm excited to dive in and hear what everyone's thoughts are.
Cool. All right, so let's start off by just like making sure we understand how FRAX works. Somebody want to take a crack at just describing the basic mechanism?
Price goes up, mint more. Price goes down, burn.
Does anyone want to go into any more detail? I can do it if
So go for it, Blake.
Cool. So it seems like there's two aspects to the basic mechanism. I think the first question you always want to ask with a stable coin is what happens if it goes above $1 and what happens if it goes below $1. Above $1 is the easy case, below $1 is the hard case, right? So FRAX claims that every FRAX initially is backed by one USDC, right? And eventually they started to like progressively sort of like decollateralize via this market mechanism. So initially, you could bring a USDC dollar to FRAX. You could mint one FRAX, right? And so if FRAX trades above its peg, arbitrageurs should come in and basically like capture that profit, right? The inverse would be if FRAX is trading below $1. FRAX claims you can always get $1 of value back from the protocol. How they define value is determinant on what the collateral ratio is. But like the simple case is if one FRAX is trading at like 97 cents, you buy it for 97 cents, you bring it to the protocol will give you one USDC for that FRAX, right? So in this way, like FRAX is like unusual. FRAX actually stands for, I didn't realize it's fractional and algorithmic. So it's a combination of both. So that's the basic arbitrage sort of mechanism. That's how it like keeps its peg, right? But more importantly, it's like the collateral ratio. And the collateral ratio also moves when price deviates. So this is like the thing that I've always been curious about is like, why don't stable coins capture the value when the price goes above the peg? And so FRAX designed a mechanism to actually do that. John gave us a diagram here.
Yeah, it's not necessary to look at right now, but in case you get confused of the main cases, which is it's a 2x2 of like when it's under peg or over peg and whether it's fully collateralized or not.
Cool. So if it's above its peg, we know that there's like basically more demand in the market for FRAX than there is supply, right? We should mint more FRAX. And additionally, we should sort of capture this like, there's like this latent belief in FRAX, right? And desire to hold it. So maybe we can issue more FRAX with less collateral. And so they have this like very clever market mechanism that allows the market to decide what's the right under collateralization ratio for a stablecoin. And the simple model of this is basically every time it's over $1, you can reduce the collateralization ratio by 0.25%. So eventually, like the market should find like what's the like ideal sort of like long-term under collateralization ratio for a stablecoin if like FRAX continues to grow, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be like static, right? Like there may be some sort of like bull market under collateralization ratio and maybe like a bear market one, and maybe those are like five percentage points different or something like that. So I think that's like the basic mechanism. Is everybody straight with that? Cool. Okay, so it sounds like the vast majority of people want to talk about how stablecoins break. So does somebody want to take a crack at like what is the weakest link in FRAX? Like how does FRAX fail?
Just a question. There's two tokens, right? Is it just the two?
Yes. Yes.
Like Maker was one of the first ones to introduce these 2 token models. I have seen stablecoins that have like 3. Can someone? So I'm guessing the FRAX token is the stable one, and the FXS is. Do they call it something? They call it a governance coin or something? I'm just curious.
Got it. Yeah. We should talk about that.
I think they do.
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead, David.
Oh no. Yeah. So the FXS, I guess, is a governance token that gets that is what is distributed like when you are trading in FRAX. When you're burning FRAX and receiving what you receive on the other end is some proportion of FXS and some proportion of USDC, and so that represents a collateralized ratio. But FXS is governance, the governance token, I think, right?
Yeah. To Blake's point, they try to capture repegging activity into the FXS token. Like compare this to Fade protocol, which like kind of hand waved like when it's over peg, like there's just arbitrage. Like what is arbitrage? It's just like the protocol giving away value to like third parties. And so FXS is trying to recapture anytime there's like a movement back to peg. It should be captured by the FXS token. And
I'd be curious to hear other people's take on this. My understanding of this model is it doesn't capture 100% of that sort of kind of arbitrage opportunity. It gives, I guess, you have to give some to the arbitrageur, and like that I think is actually kind of interesting. But then they basically like capture that like sort of latent demand by saying, okay, we can lower the collateralization ratio, and then the next time somebody mints some FRAX, some percentage of that seniorage, which is basically like the profit you get from being able to issue money, goes to the FXS token, basically via a buy and burn model. So if the collateralization ratio is 85% when we issue a new FRAX, we put in 85 cents of USDC. I have to go to the open market, buy FSX, and burn 15 cents of FXS, which like reduces the supply, right, and sort of like directly increases the market cap of FXS. Also,
yeah, it's worth noting this is generally known as the seniorage token model. So like there's a volatility sink, like the volatile asset. Sorry, in case it's not clear, once the protocol goes under collateralized, it just means it's under collateralized in terms of like actually valuable collateral like USDC, but the collateral ratio gap is made up for by FXS. And so to kind of like continue on to the failure mode, the failure mode is, by the way, we saw this with Iron Titan, which was that this is in the thread that I posted, but it was a FRAX fork on BSE, I want to say. And the failure mode is essentially like if it is under peg, then you want to redeem the FRAX, which is only worth 95 cents for $1 of collateral, and the $1 of collateral is a mix of both actual valuable collateral and the governance token FXS. And so in the case where it's under peg for a really long time, what happens is there's a ton of sell pressure on FXS, the governance token. And if there's a ton of sell pressure on FXS, the governance token, then the more FXS gets sold, the lower the price of FXS there is, and the more FXS has to be minted in order to make redeemers whole. And so in the Iron Titan case, their governance token basically went to zero, which meant literally an infinite amount of supply of their governance token was being printed. And that's the failure cycle. And so in any case, like the goal should be to, Faye tried to fix this in the like V0 version by just like preventing people from redeeming, right? It's just like when it's under peg, like you just can't redeem. Like we're just going to prevent the failure case there. And that had all kinds of like obvious issues. I think I'm less familiar with the more recent advances on FXS with like AMOs and like the VE model, but presumably the VE model is like meant to lock FXS liquidity, which is just to like be like, hey, there's a really, really good reason for you, even if you do redeem for FXS, to like lock it or like earn yield on it or like do something other than just like dump it into the open market. Because if everyone starts dumping when it's like depegged, then like that leads to this runaway effect.
Yeah, I think that's a really good explanation. I would just add to that, like FRAX has this very like clever claim where they say you can always get $1 of value back from the protocol, right? And how they define value is like how they kind of get around saying you can always get $1 back. Like you can always get like $1's worth of value. How do you define value? Well, like in the case of Iron Titan, as John pointed out, like you could have a valueless thing that is claimed to have value and you could get $1 back, but that dollar might actually really be worth it.
The value is like pre-distribution. It's like they decide on the value, then they push out that many tokens, and that implicitly changes the value as they're doing it, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
It might be helpful just to think of fractional reserve banking in the traditional world first, too, just to anchor everything. I think that it's kind of hard to kind of see how this might just have some advantages over what currently exists without juxtaposing them. Because it's kind of clear. I mean, there's fractional reserve banking and there's variable collateralization ratios and there's bank runs in the real world as well. It's just interesting to see how like the reflexivity's handled with FRAX, particularly over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting comparison. Sorry, Seth, were you going to say something?
No, not directly to that comment. I was just going to say that, or I guess ask the question, are staking yields really enough to demotivate someone from unstaking, and in the event of the peg being lost, redeeming their FXS. Yeah.
What maybe sort of to the point, and going back to Jonathan's, was Iron Titan the same? Because like part of how FRAX is trying to manage the bank run issue is it requires more and more collateralization the more shelf pressure there is on FXS. Was Iron Titan the same and it just like got run away? Because I guess like my thought about like the failure mode was like, are the feedback loops tight enough, right? Like if it takes you X amount of time to get right.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's what happened with Iron Titan.
Yeah, to be super explicit, like the collateralization ratio only resets for every time T, and the Iron Titan, because it was like so clearly, a yield farm thing, like they were deeply incentivizing the pool 2, which was, I think it's literally the worst thing I think you could possibly do, which is take your governance token. Let's use the FRAX examples, like FXS against FRAX. They were deeply incentivizing that specific pool. And so in the run up, like everyone makes money. There's like tons of like emissions, but it doesn't matter that there's tons of emissions because like the price of everything's going up. And in the failure mode, it's like a classic rug, right? Like you pull the liquidity from like FXS FRAX, which like makes the liquidity depth shallower, and then you like dump FXS into the open market, which then like crashes the FXS price, which then both assets get sold. So it depegs the stable coin and it reduces the price of FXS. So then everyone starts redeeming in order to like close the ARB. And then the redemption closing the ARB dumps everything even further. And because like the collateralization ratio only resets like X basis points every like T time, it just wasn't fast enough to outrace the rug. And so, yeah, it just went to zero.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. That seemed like the obvious failure case, not knowing the Iron Titan thing.
So does FRAX have more dynamic collateralization to try to solve for that?
I actually don't know what the timing is. I assume that's a governance set metric.
I think it's any time. I think it's an external actor that can like hit it, like that can actually make it happen. That's what I read.
Yeah, I think V1 was that they switched to a PID controller and now the system does it automatically. I don't remember the time element of it now.
Is it possible? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of going back to Seth's point, or thinking about like this failure case. One of the things that FRAX added, and Tex alluded to this, was this, and Lane asked, is there only 2 tokens? There's kind of 3 tokens now. Basically, there's FRAX, there's FXS, which directly should get the seniorage from new issuance of FRAX, and then there's VEFXS, which is basically locked up FXS. And so similar to like Olympus and like a lot of, I guess every protocol has always tried to figure out like, how do we get people to lock up tokens and not be able to sell them? And in the VEFXS case, people are potentially and like highly incentivized to lock up FXS for 4 years. And I don't remember the exact metric, but I think over 90% of FXS is locked up at this point. So even if you like bought up all of the FXX, like, that's like available and dumped all of it, you probably couldn't like get the price to like move that much in a downward fashion. So in that way, that's like another sort of way that they prevent against a bank run, right? They like incentivize people to just lock up and be like heavily like long-term invested in the protocol.
Why couldn't that crash the price though? I mean, where is the FXS? It's not in the. liquidity pool.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's locked up.
but that doesn't
Like
that doesn't
staked.
protect the price from falling.
Well, if you can't,
Right.
if
Yeah.
you can't acquire tokens to sell, right? Like if only 10% of the float is like viable, right? Like if you wanted to like sell all of the tokens that are just floating, like you're
But there's
like
a
not
liquidity.
enough to really like sell.
No, because the 10% that's remaining is the only thing that's in the liquidity pool with whatever amount of USDC. And so if you can still change the prices however much you want by just selling all the FXS.
Sorry, you're right. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah,
So I
other
guess the question is like the non-locked up FXS, like where is it? Who owns it in the liquidity pool? Does FRAX own it? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that is that kind of a natural segue to the AMO thing. I mean, if one of the features is you basically directly minting stables into lending pools, I mean, market makers would be encouraged to hold on to FXS to do the minting directly. Is that like a use case that's in there?
That was actually something I wanted to bring up. That was the thing that I was most confused by. The lending option. They were saying, let's take Compound for example. Compound is allowed basically to mint FRAX because everything on Compound is over collateralized. And there was a number of places where they just said like the protocol itself can kind of mint FRAX. Like they talked about this with UniV3 as well, Curve. They were just sort of like, oh, there's like leftover FRAX kind of laying around. So it wasn't clear to me like when they're providing liquidity on UniV3, how they provide FRAX as liquidity. It sounds like it's saying the protocol itself is able to mint FRAX ad infinitum, but I don't understand how that's possible if you need to put in USDC into the protocol to mint FRAX. Does anybody understand how the protocol can just mint FRAX like without exogenous capital or collateral?
Or is it just like a permissionless way for whale to seed a lending pool? Just I'm also unclear.
I mean, I guess so. I'm bringing up two specific cases which are slightly different. So the UniV3 and Curve AMOs, they were like, okay, we have this like FRAX, like, so let me take a step back. The simplest case of their AMO is basically like they have all this USDC. It's obvious where they get that, right? Because people bring USDC to the protocol and they're allowed to mint FRAX. So what do they do with that leftover USDC? They throw it in Yearn, whatever, right? They're getting whatever like the base rate on USDC stables is.
what is the motivation to deposit USDC in mint FRAX? Wouldn't you only do that if it's overvalued or something, right? Because you're putting in $1, getting out more than $1, something like that.
Yeah. So if FRAX is over $1, you can arbit sell it for more than $1. So to me, it's obvious like how they like are generating return via the AMO by just lending out USDC. But they also mentioned specifically in the Uniswap v3 and Curve examples of their AMOs, they say that they're taking the leftover FRAX and generating a return on that. So I don't understand how the protocol itself owns FRAX.
So I think that there's a contract, or there was an AMO minter contract, but I think that's now been moved, upgraded. But it says that all of the minting is controlled through the comptroller multi-sig and time lock system.
But my understanding of that was it was like I was thinking it's almost like a DAO money market fund. Like you by owning FFX, you like own fractional shares in a money market fund, and you're like lending it out. So my it was a DAO and FXS. There was some governance capacity there where, as an FXS holder, I could say, let's go do this compound thing or whatever. I don't know if that's right though.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. To me, that's like the only thing that makes sense. Is like the DAO basically created a special relationship with a compound or money markets and said, okay, we'll give you privileges of minting FRAX in this special way where you don't have to provide USDC collateral through the typical system. You are already over collateralized. So like you take this like collateralized position and you can mint FRAX against it, and we don't like hold that collateral. So that I think answers that question. And then the other question I have, if anyone has a take on this, is like, how do they get how does the protocol itself have FRAX? If every time it mints FRAX, it gives it to the person that gave the protocol collateral, the protocol has the only thing the protocol owns is USDC, right? So how does it supply liquidity to UniV3 or to Curve? I don't know where it's getting its own FRAX.
What it related to this, like, what is the yield paid out in, right? Like, if they're lending it out and they're earning some yield, is that where the new FRAX is coming from? Like, goes to a treasury?
I know at least for for the lending stuff, that's kind of like the whole flywheel thing. Is they're basically saying like any additional revenue that the treasury generates via these AMO operations, it will buy and burn for FXS. So that's how they always like basically like return cash to the shareholders.
Right.
Does it never burn? It never mints FRAX itself? There's no situation where it's missing.
Seems like the way they're describing it, the protocol itself can mint FRAX, but that seems like a terrible idea for the protocol itself to be able to just mint FRAX without providing collateral.
Right. It can't use its reserve of collateral to mint FRAX.
Because that would be the purpose.
Or can it to change the collateralization ratio?
Okay, I guess we'll punt on that question for now. What were the other things that I had? Does anybody want to talk about the VE-FXS system? I think that's one of the other like really interesting things about the protocol. Do you want to give us some thoughts on it, Tex? You still there, Tex?
Yeah, I'm still here. Honestly, I was hoping to join and learn a little bit from others. It still is
Cool.
one of the areas I'm not fully well versed in. I think John knows a lot more than me.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm happy to give my little rant on the VE-FXS system. So I was talking to Nikolai about this earlier. It seems like there's like two things that a stablecoin has to do. It has to convince people that the peg is sound, right? And they do that via this like this arbitrage mechanism, right? And this belief that you can always get a dollar of value from the protocol. And then you have to basically like convince people that there's utility to holding this stablecoin. And in my mind, utility, and Olympus, I think, did a really good job with this before like the market crashed. Trying to figure out like how do you get people to either like hold the stable coin, right? That's like the number one utility of the stable coin is just like trade volatile assets for stable assets, right? But additionally, like you basically want like protocols to hold massive amounts of stablecoin. How do you get protocols to hold massive amounts of stablecoin? You get it to be listed as like the base pair in all of DeFi, right? So if you need like originally like one of the big sources of demand for Bitcoin was altcoins, right? So if you wanted to trade altcoins or buy altcoins, typically they only had BTC pairs, and exchanges adding USDC or USDT pairs to altcoins substantially like reduced the demand for Bitcoin. And so in my mind, like for a stablecoin to really like prove itself, it has to be sort of this like base trading pair all across DeFi. And so that to me is like what is really, really interesting about what FRAX is doing is they have this FRAX as a service thing that they just spun up. And that allows like any protocol to basically spin up liquidity for their token. Typically, like there's this constraint of like, how do you get people to put up like a valuable asset, aka a stable coin, USDC, ETH, something like that, against a volatile or potentially like asset that doesn't have value. And so I think FRAX is doing a really good job of trying to figure out like how to get it in as many places around the ecosystem, and provide like real utility for FRAX itself. And so how are they doing that? Basically, like they're saying, okay, like taking this curve model. So basically what they're saying is like, okay, if you have FXS, you are capturing all of the sort of seigniorage profits, rights, whatever, from minting new FRAX, right? So like if the FRAX ecosystem grows, the majority of that is going to be captured by FXS holders. But then they're like, okay, also we're able to generate all this cash via our like open market operations, right? So they're taking like their USDC, they're like throwing it in Urn, somehow they have this additional FRAX. They're like, okay, we're going to put it in UniV3, we're going to put it in Curve, so on and so forth. We're going to lend FRAX out on Compound, and they're able to generate like a ton of cash. And in the mechanism paper, they pointed out that they're able to basically return the same amount of, they're able to generate the same amount of cash on the current FRAX outstanding that Circle is with all the USDC that it has. So basically like this VEFXS system says, okay, like every week or whatever it is, we're going to create this, we have this like stream of cash, right? And we're gonna like pay out these rewards to kind of like this whole ecosystem. And what we wanna do is we wanna incentivize demand or utility for the FRAX stablecoin, right? So if you wanna get your stablecoin like paired with as many assets as possible, what do? Well, you do basically what Curve did, and you incentivize people to put liquidity into those pairs. So FRAX created these things called gauges, works very similar to how the Curve gauges work. And basically, like any DEX, like anywhere in the entire ecosystem for any pair, FRAX can now incentivize people to pair the FRAX stablecoin against some other asset. So basically now like you have this like big sort of like flywheel effect where people want to get the FXS emissions from these gauges, and you need to, the VEFXS holders can vote on where those emissions go. So FRAX wants FRAX paired with as many assets as possible, right? And how do they incentivize that? They take the long-term token holders, people that are like taking FXS, locking it up, becoming VEFXS. Those people that have that governance right now, they can decide which pair anywhere in the DeFi ecosystem is going to get these rewards, and they're generating like all this cash and sort of like returning that cash to the VEFXS holders through the issuance of new FXS. So they have these like two sort of like cash generating operations, right? They have the seigniorage piece, which goes directly to FXS holders. And then if you take your FXS and you lock it in for like the long term with the protocol, then you get to vote on which gauges are getting FXS emissions, right? Which is basically like the stream of cash they generate through the AMO operations. And that's sort of like the full kind of loop, right? So like people have been talking about these like curve wars forever, right? And curve wars are basically about how do you like keep like a stablecoin peg, but you don't really get like utility via having your stablecoin. So curve is basically like a war for liquidity on a stablecoin, and tokamak and I think now like FRAX are kind of like the cornerstone of like trying to figure out like how do you get your stablecoin to have the most utility, and the most utility is basically like having the most pairs. So that's kind of like my little thesis on FRAX. Anyone have any thoughts, questions, disagreements?
No, that was just great explanation. I just add that I think that convex is going to be used similarly with the kind of FRAX ecosystem. And I think that there's a new kind of beta for locking both escrowed FRAX onto convex. And so if there's any other liquidity pools as part of their roadmap, we'll probably just see an expansion in that ecosystem.
I guess going back to Jonathan's original point of like, how does this fail or how does this blow? Like the first thing that like entered my mind is like, if I was like a huge trader, I would just like, and there's this reflexive downward feedback loop, right? Like I would just be like trying to build a huge position of like short borrow and like tank this thing. And then the thing about locking it up is really interesting because it also reduces the float, which makes it easier for me to tank the thing. So like, it seems like there is some like escape velocity where like it's so big that no one can do that. But like that, if I was like trying to make money from this, like that's the first obvious trade to do here, right? Like it has a predefined algorithmic way in which it can blow up. And like I could like calculate, I could figure out what the price impact was going to be and basically try to blow the thing up at some point, which I don't know if that's what happened with, like that's the obvious trade.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I think that actually like is very similar to the famous like George Soros trade where he sort of targeted the Bank of England and basically like in this case FXS is the lender of last resort, right? If you can make basically like if you can challenge whether or not like they can absorb your sort of attack, right? Like in the case of a central bank, they can kind of like print infinitely, so you never typically want to take on a central bank. But in the case of Soros, if anybody doesn't remember, he was basically of the opinion that like he was short, I think, the British pound, and he was challenging the central bank. Lane, do you remember this story?
Yeah,
well?
this is a big one. It's called breaking the pound or breaking the Bank of England. So central banks can print endlessly, but that doesn't help them defend a peg or defend the value of their currency, right? Because it's the exact opposite. The more they print and the more they sell, the more it depresses the price of the currency. So you're right. He was short the British pound. He was betting against it. That the Bank of England would not defend it past a certain point. So he was very, very short the pound. And the only way that a central bank can defend a currency is by buying that currency, not by printing it, issuing it, and selling it. And so they had a certain, number of billions of dollars of other currency, of dollars and things in reserve, and they eventually ran out, and he won. It was a huge deal. He made like $1 billion in that trade or something.
And I think there was something related to interest rates where the to get more like deposits into the country, I think they were raising interest rates to incentivize capital to come in. And then he was also part of the bet was saying like they wouldn't raise interest rates like above a certain point because it'd be too costly to the economy, to the country, so on and so forth. So yeah, to your point, Taylor, like I think it's a really interesting example of like it's very clear what the failure case is, and you can kind of just do the math and figure out like what would it take to attack this system.
Can you go through the failure case in more detail?
So let me add just one other thing that I think is interesting there is like I guess that's kind of my question with like algorithmic stablecoins in general, which is like part of what's hard about like dealing with the Fed is like you don't actually know what they're going to do, right? There's like a human there that's like making some decisions, whereas like by definition, if it's algorithmic, like it's very easy to simulate exactly how they respond to various scenarios, right? And that to me, that I don't know if that seems problematic.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah,
did you? Sorry, what were you saying?
I agree very strongly with that point. I think that's a really important point. I think it's a question of game theory and sort of information asymmetries, or in this case, symmetries. This reminds me a lot of when the Constitution DAO, was trying to buy the Constitution, and the Ken Griffith, like he knew how much they could pay because it was all transparent. It was a huge information asymmetry there. It's exactly the same situation. These things are very important.
I guess I can talk to the failure case again. So the failure case is let's assume the collateralization ratio is like 85% or something like that, right? So FRAX is basically saying no matter what, hey, don't worry, you can always get $1 of value back from the protocol, right? That's very easy if you're USDC because USDC has dollars in a bank account, and you can always bring a token and they'll give you $1, an actual dollar back, right? In FRAX's case, they're saying, well, we'll have 85 cents on hand, and then there's this other thing that has value that we'll give you, right? So we'll give you 15 cents of FXS, right? So they'll mint 15 cents of FXS, give you 85 cents of USDC, and they give you that, right? there's probably like a baked in assumption that you're going to then go to the market and you're going to sell that FXS on the open market, right? And so now you have your dollar, right? You're probably going to sell it to USDC or something like that, right? So there's a case where you kind of get like a reflexive down loop where the peg depegs, right? And so everyone's going like, well, I'm freaked out. Maybe the peg is at 90 cents or something like that, right? And you're like, you know what? Like, I don't feel that good about like FRAX anymore. Like, I want dollars, right? I want USDC. So everyone starts going to the protocol and asking the protocol, hey, give me $1 of value. And all those people going to the protocol asking for $1 of value, there's basically just like this auto mint dynamic that's happening where you're just inflating the supply of FSX over and over and over. And that supply is almost certainly being sold directly, basically like market sell, market sell, market sell, right? And as the price of FXS goes down, let's say the price is 100 when this starts, the protocol only has to mint 0.15, tokens of FXX to like redeem your claim, right? But as the price of FXS goes down, as it gets sold, the value, how much FXS has to be minted to like redeem each claim starts to go up. So more FXX gets sold, so on and so forth. So like you never want like a feedback loop, in one of these cases, right? Where like it feeds on itself, and that dynamic, like there's nothing that's pushing the system back into balance once you hit that case.
Right. Yeah. I guess the assumption I missed is that like all of the FXX is going to be sold, right? So yeah, it makes sense, of course.
And I think one thing that we agreed we're not clear on is like, I'm not exactly sure like how much liquidity there is for FXS and how much of that is like owned by the protocol and like so on and so forth. But I know that the PID controller takes into account like the actual like liquidity of the markets in like sort of like minting new FRAX. So I know that it's like sort of like part of the system. And I think it's an important part of the system, but it'd be interesting to have a better sense of like how much liquidity there is for like the size of the market and so on and so forth. So you can get a sense of like how much money would it take basically to attack the system.
Is the PID controller algorithmic or is that a DAO?
Yeah.
It's algorithmic?
It's algorithmic.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the other thing just along the like a lot of these things, they seem to assume like continuous markets. There's like no price capping, and like that's true 99.9% of the time. But the 0.1 where it's not is where you blow up, kind of thing. Because like that to me, it's like that's how you get the feedback loop. You have a huge gap down in the market, liquidity dries up, and then it's over.
Which gap? What gap are you talking about, Tyler?
I just like the idea is like if you have imagine like to John's point about like time key, like if you have this perfectly continuous feedback loop, then you're re-collateralizing, right? Like as the price comes down, you're like getting more and more dollars in there. But if you have a big gap in the price, right? Like now this it's not a continuous market. It's not the feedback loop, but now you've blown out into this reflexive thing. I think that's right.
Yeah. And then also people can coordinate this, right? Like you can make like hypothetically like a dark pool that like gathers together a group of activists who want to see this crash or incentivized to do so because they take out a position against it, and
right.
they can
like
just coordinate this and then have this, execute via smart contracts, right? Like hitting exactly like when the weakness is.
Yeah, if I was trading this, I would almost like be like trying to talk to all the OTC desk and like see how much demand for borrow there was, right? Like, was someone building up some big short position here? And obviously they'd be like trying to camouflage it, but like that, yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny hearing that from you, given what you do. Makes a lot of sense that's your. That's the part of it that you.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm on the other side of a lot of those types of trades, so that's exactly what I would be trying to do.
What do you do, Taylor?
I run a tail risk long volatility hedge fund. So we're basically taking
I see.
advantage of people that don't think that prices gap.
Yeah, this has been a super interesting conversation. I think, Taylor, your point about this all being algorithmic, that was something that I was super excited about initially, but I totally missed the aspect that you're basically just like laying your cards completely out on the table, as far as like there's not even an element where like the DAO can like cease operations and step in and like raise liquidity or whatever. It's all purely algorithmic, and that's like something that they like. It seems like that's part of their ethos. It's like eventually we want this to be purely algorithmic, purely decentralized. There's no human intervention, but that makes it so predictable in terms of exactly how to attack it, which makes me wonder. I know I was looking at like Terra Luna last week, the Terra ecosystem, and they have a similar mechanism where you can always go to the protocol and swap Luna, $1 worth of Luna for 1 Terra, and or 1 Terra for $1 worth of Luna, and that's basically a virtual AMM. And they have like Jump Trading is one of the big investors in Terra. So obviously like they're more sophisticated than any of us on the call. So they've like thought this through. But the main attack that they are worried about is the ability to manipulate the price manipulate the Luna price outside of the protocol AMM. And so they're basically saying, as long as the amount of liquidity in the overall ecosystem outside of what the protocol will trade for you is higher, you can't basically like attack the protocol's AMM. So basically, the amount that the protocol will switch for you in any given like unit of time is basically capped by like Jump's assessment of like the overall liquidity, and their claim is that as long as the liquidity is higher outside, it would take more basically to like move the price and then kind of like cheat the AMM. And if it wasn't true, then you could kind of do it recursively forever. And it seems like that like there is an analogy here where you'd want to calculate like how much you could profit like from an attack on the protocol. And I can't like live think through like how you'd want to do it, but it'd be something to do with sort of like how much short you could get, like how much liquidity there is in the market, and like maybe the protocol is like defended from that attack basically just by like making sure the market cap of FXX is like larger than the amount of FRAX, or something like that. I'm not sure, but I want to think through that.
I feel like the locked up, as you were alluding to before, like maybe the locked up FXS is in the liquidity pools, and that will guard against price movement, right? If the staked FXS somehow makes it back into the liquidity pools.
Yeah, I don't think that would make a ton of sense. I feel like typically when you stake tokens, they're just kind of locked in a contract. I don't think you would want them trading on an AMM. But yeah, I don't know. This has been a super interesting call. I went from being like super hyped on FRAX to thinking that there's a couple very, very huge holes, which is really fun.
Yeah, this was really good. Two other thoughts off what you were saying, Blake. One, I think like the base trading pair stablecoin thesis is really interesting, and it's like I think that kind of plays out with the dollar, right? Like part of the reason the dollar is strong is because if you're a Brazilian company doing a debt deal with German investors, like what is that denominated in? It's denominated in dollars, right? And so you have this like massive structural bid for dollars because all these contracts everywhere are denominated in dollars, and like that's the U.S. defends that, and they don't want stuff denominated in rubles or yen or whatever. And then the second thing that you said that was interesting, like I wonder if there's like a slightly less algorithmic, more DAO-y version of this, almost like a DAO Fed, right? Where you have some governance structure, where you have 5 board of directors or something that have some sort of executive control to respond to certain things within certain parameters. and you take away that like purely algorithm. You have some discretion in there, but it's more, but it's still controlled and certain. Like you could, I don't know, vote those people out, or I don't know how the exact rules, but that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing is a little bit how Maker works. They have some set of, I don't know if it's a formal DAO or whatever, but they have like a set of people, board of directors, something like that, that can basically like suspend the entire system and have sort of like pull the emergency hatch, right? And then they also can then like go to like VCs and like raise additional liquidity and like so on and so forth, right? Which is kind of like what you would want. But I think the interesting thing about like this is it's kind of like there's like this circular thing where in crypto from like what we believe in, it's like everyone wants everything to move purely towards like pure decentralization protocols, so on and so forth. So
yeah,
people
Blake, the thing you mentioned about Maker, it's funny, you said it's what you want. I see why you would say that, but it's also the number one thing that Maker gets criticized about. People call it too centralized.
Yeah, that's what I think is so interesting, is it's like I actually think that it's like a good thing, but you know, it's like anything else, right? It's like a feature or a bug depending on how you look at it.
Well, what can you really do though? Outside of pausing it, like what is the break glass in case of emergency? Like pause outside of, so you pause it, then they raise money to supply this liquidity or to, you know, back or for the collateralized. But are there any other tools aside from that at their disposal?
I mean, again, I'll bring up another example from the Terra Luna ecosystem because I went so deep on it last week. Basically, like, in my opinion, like the whole Terra Luna thing is like kind of a Ponzi scheme, you know, kind of like everything in crypto. And they're kind of just like, okay, like we're just going to subsidize this ecosystem until we can grow it big enough that there's like real demand for this blockchain, right?
That is, and the way, like, Blake, literally what you said, that is everything in crypto, like 99%.
Yeah, so I'm picking on them, but like also not, right? It's just like what everybody does. So basically, like they have this like giant like sink of money, right? Faucet of money called Anchor. The Anchor protocol is the thing that generates demand for Terra. So basically, you can take Terra, you can put it in Anchor, and you get a 20% annual yield on a stable coin, right? Which is like incredible. And theoretically, it's a money market. So like theoretically, they're lending that Terra out, and hopefully you'd want a protocol to lend at a higher rate than it borrows. But it doesn't, right? It lends at much lower rates. So basically, there's this Anchor treasury, which of course is on chain. And you can just see the funds draining out of Anchor as like there's this mismatch between the borrow and lend rate, right? And going back to this idea of like too centralized, or like what could like a board of directors or somebody do? Do Kim, basically, all these people were like, when Anchor gets down to zero, there'll be no more demand to hold Terra, and the whole system will reflexively like unwind, right? And so he tweeted out, how much should I put into the Anchor treasury? 100 million, 200 million, or 300 million? And so, like, in my opinion, basically, like, all of this is a game of, like, money, right? And it's like, he's basically saying, I'm the central bank of Terra, and I have infinite capital, or at least more capital than you do, right? And so if you have enough capital, and you think that, like, you could short Luna with, like, enough size that you could make X amount of dollars, right? Like, he's basically saying, yeah, I'm willing to just like in perpetuity fund this like Anchor faucet of money to convince people to keep coming into the ecosystem, or less in perpetuity.
This is so fascinating. Thank you for sharing this. I saw the tweets. I didn't know the whole context, but this sounds exactly like we talked about a moment ago, the Bank of England defending the British pound. It's the same thing. It's like this chicken battle between these two sides. It's like who's got bigger balls and who's willing to like push harder. It's so interesting to see this play out on chain.
And the hybrid of in the Terra ecosystem is interesting, right? Because on chain you can see the Terra, the Anchor treasury, but that's not actually representative, because he's just like, yeah, I'll just shove more money into that, and you don't know how much money I have. Although they just raised $1 billion, so he's like, I have at least $1 billion, plus what like we have in private coffers that you can't see off chain. So that's, I think, an interesting model where you have this like on chain component that's like trustless. It's a protocol, blah blah blah. But then you have these like external actors that you you can't like reason like mathematically about like the probability that they will come in and how much money will they come in for, and so like it like you add like an element of uncertainty to like any attack on like something like that, which I think is incredibly valuable. From like a stability perspective, it's incredibly valuable for your attacker not to know how much capital they might have to like put in and that they'll guaranteed to be profitable. From a decentralization perspective, it like makes a mockery of like the whole thing. So
I think we've seen elements of this play out in Bitcoin and Ethereum as well. As you know, when we had these scenarios of markets crashing, we used to joke about the Joe Lubin put in ETH price. There was like a floor below which, you know, certain wealthy people or organizations would not let ETH fall. And I think the same may have been true for Bitcoin, even Bitcoin Cash historically.
Yeah, absolutely. We're about out of time. This has been super interesting, super fun. All face for treasury managing. I don't know what that is. And also Michael Kim said earlier, the direct lending minting is also done by Maker with Aave. So maybe we can look into that. Cool. Thanks everybody. Rich from Crypto NYC is buddies with Sam, so I'm gonna try and follow up with him and maybe get some of these open questions answered. And if so, I will report back.
Great call. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Blake.
Yes.
I'm gonna drop off. Is Nikolai around?